take a turn.
Hey guys, welcome to the HooperCast. Hi Dustin.
Hello, Hooper.
How are you?
I'm good. I have a mouthful of pizza.
How's that pizza taste?
Oh, it's delicious.
I got some soup.
That sounds good too.
It's not.
Oh well, I apologize.
It's real like
for my insensitivity.
There's like a gram of salt in this thing, and it's just
Bland.
Well, I guess I don't know. Don't buy Progresso, everybody. Buy Campbell's. Buy Chunky. I usually buy Chunky, but there was like a sale on the Progresso. Although I'll say this is not it's not as bad as the other Progresso soup I had the other day, which actually had meat in it. This is like the vegetable soup, but their pot roast one was real bad because I guess it had more salt because it had to preserve the meat, and it was just like dumping the whole salt shaker in my mouth, and then like a little bit of a cow. So
Yeah. Well, my suggestion, everybody, is to have some pizza.
Yeah. Today the podcast is sponsored by pizza.
This episode brought to you by pizza.
Today's food fight is brought to you HooperCast food fight
by Campbell's Chunky.
Who lunched better today, Dustin or Connor? And the winner is Dustin with pizza. That's probably sadly going to become a segment on the show is food fight. What do you have, Dustin? Nothing. What do you got? I got this. I'd rather have what you're eating. Okay, cool. Well, you win.
Cool.
Well, today we're going to talk about a couple things. The first of which is a documentary that I saw. It's been out for a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I think, and it's called I Am Chris Farley, and it's it's about Chris Farley. And it's what's been out? Oh, I guess 3 weeks. And I watched it on iTunes. I don't know if you can really get it anywhere else. I'm sure other networks as well, but you can't get it on like at Redbox or anything. This is iTunes and or Amazon.
Right.
I went into it, obviously loving Chris Farley, and if you don't, why would you show an interest in this subject? But
right.
For anyone who really doesn't know, which I'd be really surprised, Chris Farley was an extremely talented comedic actor who was largely famous from being a Saturday Night Live cast member and kind of entering the foray into movies. And he died in 1997. In late 1997 from drug overdose, right? Didn't he?
Right.
Didn't he? Yeah, he died at 33, and he died of a drug overdose. And it was one of those really sad. All deaths are sad.
Right, but yeah, this one because he had such promise. He had
such promise, and he seemed like such a good, genuine person and a very giving person. And so this movie is kind of just about and I say the word "just" very purposefully. It's just about that. And what I mean by that is I don't know if I really learned anything new from this documentary. I mean, details like I didn't know how many brothers he had or what his dad did for a living or anything. But I didn't finish the documentary with much more of a sense of knowing who he was. I mean, I sort of, but that's just me. But I assumed that he seemed like a nice person, and I thought, well, perhaps with addiction comes someone acting kind of like an asshole, but that wasn't really even part of his behavior either. Chris Farley is just a really funny guy from Wisconsin who got into like the theater program after being he's got I think he's got 3 brothers or 2 brothers, 4 siblings. Sorry, and his dad owned an oil company. I mean, good all American boy, growing up in what year was he born? 64. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, in working class Wisconsin. I mean, that's a what do you call it? Like a nuclear family kind of,
Right, yeah.
And fishing and outdoor stuff. And as we all know from his comedy bits, an extremely athletic guy, despite
physical.
Even being overweight and borderline obese during his most prominent years. I mean, he probably more flexible than I am.
Sure.
With these high kicks, it's
ridiculous.
This was before, right before Jack Black was doing essentially the same thing, but it's more impressive with Farley because he's just a much bigger guy. He was a really husky, strong dude, and got into the theater program, and the documentary kind of goes into more of like when he started joining the Second City Players, which turned out great comedic performers like Steve Carell, and at least in his theater company, the same company he was in, Bob Odenkirk, who's done many things, among them currently Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. But Bob Odenkirk he's one of the more prominent subjects of the documentary, and so it's got archival footage of him doing some of these bits, including his most famous and my favorite of his, which is the Matt Foley, the motivational speaker. Yeah, which is who he took the name Matt Foley from his friend Matt Foley, who's in the documentary and is now a priest.
Wow.
And he said,
and does not live in a van down by the river.
No, he lives like above a church rectory or something, and he's and they show essentially the entire bit. I mean, they're talking to Christina Applegate and David Spade and stuff, and I'm laughing out loud watching that bit. It's just so fun. He's just so funny,
right?
And so it's fun to watch just because you get to kind of you get to watch his career, and maybe I'm a little bit morbid, but when it gets to the end and talking mostly about like his personal problems and his death, I guess I didn't really feel much impact. And I'm not saying I wanted to, watch Molly Shannon just sob and take her mic off or anything.
Sure.
But maybe it's because this happened. This was almost 20 years ago that he died. You know what I mean? It's
right.
So, that's a small critique. But I guess maybe it just didn't play up his death, which it didn't have to.
Sure.
I don't know why I expected them to. I just sort of expected to see a lot of these actors do more than just go, yeah, it was hard. But again,
so I guess it
20
feels
years
probably
ago,
more factual than emotional.
Yeah, or I feel like if this were a research paper, I don't know, I'd give it like a B. It's okay. This is all accurate, and you've got all the right players in here, but it just didn't go that extra. I don't know. And again, I don't know what I would have. This is one of those things where I'm at a loss for where I don't know what else I would have done with it. Which I don't want to throw you under the bus, Dustin, which is one of the reasons I wish you had seen it because this is normally where you'd come in and go, I know what's missing. But I can't put my finger on it. What it is. But it's just it was lacking something. Like I told you a couple weeks ago with documentaries, I never feel like they're a waste of time because you always learn something.
Yeah.
And black and white, I learned things here.
Right.
But I almost came out of it thinking like, what did that tell me about him that I didn't already pretty much assume? I mean, I learned kind of how generous he was. Like he was, his family was Catholic growing up. And he sort of carried that spirit over into how he treated people. He treated everyone really well. And they were saying he was the kind of person you'd pass a homeless guy on the street and, they'd be like, oh, you got any money? And people, and he says, and I'd be like, I don't got anything. And Chris would say like, I can't just leave. Like, what if we just pass Jesus Christ? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And, what if that's how and he's testing us, he was an extremely generous and loving, giving person. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too critical of it. I watched it and I enjoyed it, but I guess nothing really came out and surprised me about it.
Right, sure.
But
well, let me ask you this, because the thing that I kind of wanted most from it is almost like a as well as getting to know him as a person, like a critique or an analysis of his comedic style? Did they do much of that, or talk about his specific traits that made him special?
That's the good point. They do talk about that. I mean, Chris's whole thing being, where not that other comedians wouldn't be committed to the bit, but they're like, he was fully committed. Just like Mike Myers, I think, said, like, I was inspired by his commitment. I mean, he's, he said even when he fell down, he wouldn't put his arms out or anything. He would just fall. And they said even Chevy Chase, when he would do Gerald Ford, he would have something on the ground to essentially absorb the fall.
Sure.
But Chris just fell like straight onto the floor, like on his face or chest. Like he and would just sort of take it. And how he wasn't really much of a writer. I think they said he wrote like one sketch and it was like 40 pages long. Or something like that, some big number, and said they're just reading through it at the table read, and they're going like, "God, this is bad." I think it was called like Dr. Cat or something. It was stupid, and how he would sort of but he would do whatever the writers needed him to do in the bit, and he even in small, like they're talking about when him and Spade were off filming Tommy Boy. They were out filming in like Vancouver or something, and so they'd fly in like Friday or Saturday afternoon. And do Saturday Night Live. And so there's this one skit it's like Pepper Boy, and it's an Adam Sandler bit where like, he's like the guy in the restaurant who crunches the pepper onto your salad, and the guy's explaining like, this is an art, I want to pass this on to you, and he's like, okay, it was an Adam Sandler foreign accent bit, and that was essentially the joke. And so Spade is one of the people in the restaurant. At some point Chris Farley is, and David Spade's saying like he was he only has one line in this bit, and he's saying like, I'm gonna get a laugh, you watch, and it's it's supposed to be like, oh, Pepper Boy, this is the perfect amount of pepper, thank you or something, and he says, and before it, Farley goes, I'm gonna get a laugh with that line, and he's like, no, you're not, like, so Chris Farley had I guess went in the back or whatever, and he got this big red bushy beard to wear in the restaurant, so you already roll up on him, and you're like, what? And so he does the pepper. Instead of just like saying his line, he basically just shouts it. And he's just like, Pepper Boy, thank you. This is the perfect amount of pepper. Bravo. And it just got a huge, it like destroyed. And it's just all he's saying is thanks for the pepper.
Right.
Like he just, even when he had a little bit, he tried to make it just the funniest thing possible. He was all about pleasing other people. So yeah, I mean, there's actually a good, healthy amount of analysis of his comedic style and what sort of set him apart from the other people.
Right.
I mean, Chris, he was. I guess if you were to average out his stats, like in terms of like his writing, there's really no strength there. But but he's stacked in the performance category. Whereas some people may be more evenly keeled. Like Tina Fey is obviously much more of a writer than she was a performer. I mean, she's a perfectly competent performer and would perform plenty, but she was a much stronger writer than she was a performer. Same with Seth Meyers. I mean, he was. I mean, him and Tina were both head writers at one point, but he didn't have a lot of range as a performer.
No,
and even Farley, being like a character actor, essentially had incredible range. And they even talk about how in Tommy Boy, like you saw his actual range as an actor. This was his first movie. But even in the scenes where he's talking about how much he loves his dad, like all the subtleties, it's just like, wow, this guy can actually act too.
Right.
So they talk a good bit to his brother Kevin Farley, who looks a lot like him, who's a comedian, and got a couple of other brothers. And they talk to his mom. I think his dad's dead. So yeah, I mean, God, I've been talking about it for 13 minutes. So maybe it's. It's, much like many things I talk about on the show, I come in thinking it's okay, and then I hammer on about it, and so it's probably better. So if you want to see it, I think it costs like $3.99 on iTunes. And yeah, if you want to spend the money, I mean, yeah, it's if you're a fan of his, check it out. I mean, I just don't see it being much more. Honestly, like I don't know what this documentary offered that would have offered more than like a True Hollywood Story on E! Or something, that was edited for television. You know,
Right.
I guess that's what I mean. Like it was great, but I don't know if it in itself is great as much as just the concept. Like,
Sure.
it's kind of like you pick her up like a president. Like, you know, I like you because you're probably the only one who's offering me these couple things I care about. But if I was picking you from other people who were at least as good as you may not be my first choice. Like, you're not my first choice, but you're my only choice. You know what I mean? This is like the only documentary about Chris Farley. So, of course, I'm going to enjoy it to some degree. I can't get this content anywhere else.
Right.
So, I guess that's what I mean.
I got you. Well, you know, it is something that I want to see, and I think I will still see it. I just haven't gotten around to having time to sit down and do it. But yeah, man, I love Chris Farley, so I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah. And even though it's been about, like I said, it's been 18, 19 years since he died.
People are still influenced by him, and people are still inspired by him because, like you said, not just commitment, but to me, versatility. Because, like you said, he was the only guy that could take a non-funny line and make it funny. And then, on top of that, he was the only person that could take a funny sketch and
elevated
be the
even
standout
higher
pretty much every single time.
Right.
And, you know, in terms of like physical comedy, he's like the old school, like pratfall kind of a guy.
Yeah, slapstick.
Yeah, slapstick, pratfall kind of stuff. And then he can also, I feel like, deliver in terms of like, here's a really smartly written line. Even if he didn't write it, here's a smartly written line. Let's give it to Chris, and he can do that too.
Right.
And so I think you're right on point about his performance. I mean, he could do all of it as a comedian, and that's super rare, and that's why I think he's had the legacy that he's had.
Of all the performers on Saturday Night Live ever, I mean, off the top of my head, he might be the most memorable and prolific. You know, I mean, there's other people who obviously are, I mean, God, you can't. You know, you don't want to throw any of that 90s cast, really. You don't want to throw away Kevin Nealon or especially like Mike Myers or even Adam Sandler's okay, to be honest. I think he's overhyped in most of his career. But Chris Farley is just he was the one. I don't want to talk like I watched the show live in the 90s, but like whenever I would see a sketch with that cast, I'm always thinking, oh, I wonder what Chris Farley's going to be doing, because it's just he's the one to watch. He's the most watchable, and just seemed to be the most likable. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, he sometimes, and this is I think a problem with SNL sometimes, is those actors get a big head, especially when they start doing
movies,
films. They start kind of thinking like, okay, well, I'm kind of better than SNL, so in a way they don't seem like they're having fun. But Chris Farley never felt that way. Like, I never watched a sketch with him in it where he felt like he was just ready to get out.
No, he wanted to make people laugh, and he actually missed being on the show because, like, basically a whole regime came in at some point in NBC, and they decided, like, we don't like Chris Farley, we don't like Adam Sandler, we don't like David Spade. They just kind of, like, they sort of, when there was that big cast change, it was like, it was a management thing. So that's what started fueling his personal problems, because at least, you know, if the movie didn't do well, whatever, you could always go back on Saturday night and make people laugh. And when there wasn't that, and he wasn't seasoned enough as a film actor to be able to just have a thick skin about, because I think it was it might have been Tommy Boy that didn't do that well at the time, actually. Even though now it's like you put it on these top comedy lists, like people love that movie. And he wasn't quite equipped to cope with the disapproval, I guess.
Sure.
And that just sort of started, you know, they're talking about how late in life he all of a sudden had this terrible self-image, whereas that never existed before. You know, he would say, like, you know, people, they love to see Fatty fall. And it's like, what? Like, what's wrong, man? Like,
right.
So he was a tremendous performer and a tremendous human being. And, you know, without having obviously known him personally, or even, I wasn't even aware of him until after he was dead. You know what I mean? But I wish I had been. And I'm glad I am now, because he's a tremendous talent. And, you know. So,
yeah, well said.
Yeah. let's you want to talk about Friday Night Lights?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I'm way behind the curve behind Dustin and John, but I finally was able to watch and finish Friday Night Lights on Netflix, all 5 seasons on Netflix. And so I finished that pretty recently, and I figured we'd come on and talk about it. Because you and John would casually reference it every now and then, and I just would have zero context. But we always bring it up because we see these actors all over the place, you know, particularly Taylor Kitsch, and especially recently Michael B. Jordan.
Right.
So oh, God,
So
I don't even know where to start,
Yeah, I was going to say, hit me with your overall feeling of the show as a whole. Like, if you were going to rank it, you know, A, B, C, D, F, where does it fall?
I want to say A, but I'm wondering, am I overhyping it, and should it be a B? Because to me, an A is like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad, and since it just feels so different from those, it's hard to say, well, is this the same? But for what it is, it's probably an A, considering everything that was thrown at it. I mean, if it's a B, it's a high B, and if it's an A, it's a low A because of that first season. But for being a network television show that essentially, with one mini season that was halfway retconned, and you know, half a season in terms of length, and that wasn't even, and the second season is not even a finished season. For them to not be on NBC, but to be on the 101 network for its final 3 years, and then later air on NBC. Like, just considering all the stuff that was going on with the network with that show, for them to still maintain great storylines and good characters without really the show losing direction, I think is incredible. And I don't see how you could repeat that today. You know, with a show having that much uncertainty, you'd feel like just someone would get burned out, or performances would get phoned in, or writers would quit. You know, so I think, especially with what went on with it behind the scenes, it's incredible that they turned out such a great product.
I agree.
I mean, this is a show. This show was on from what 2007 to 11 or 20 or to 2010 or something. This is a show. If you don't know, it's essentially about a high school football team and their coach and the players, and it's set in rural Texas, and it's about a great many things. You know, among the big issues they tackle are racism, you know, teen angst, broken homes, drug abuse, gang violence, you know, pretty serious issue, abortion, sex. I mean, they tackle pretty serious issues, and this is handled a lot better and more realistically, I think, than most shows would do. I mean, I say it's a network show. It's just because it airs on a network. But like this subject matter and the artfulness included and the level of acting and writing in this show, it deserved better than to just air on NBC. I mean, I hate to say. It really did. And this is right when television was getting really good. And this is one of those shows that elevated what people expect from television and from stories. Right. I mean, like I said, the weakest part's that first season, and it's just because it's the longest. I mean, that's like 23 episodes or something. Right. And they're establishing a lot, and there's a lot of dumb, teenagey, angsty things where it's predictable outcomes. Like, oh, you're talking, that guy's, you know, whereas, Dustin, if your girlfriend was talking to some dude she used to date or whatever, I don't think you'd be that nervous about it. But if you were both teenagers, you'd be like freaking out about it. And then, you know, but as a viewer, I'd be sitting there like, okay, well, either this is going to work out or it's not. But either way, let's cut to the chase. Like, I don't want to string this along for 5 episodes. And that's what it does. Yep. And then that second season's so short because of the writer's strike. But basically from that third on, I mean, it's really good television. Yeah, I mean, the way that I always look at it is like the first season is trying to find its footing, but the performances are all on point. And although even sometimes the actors are still trying to kind of figure themselves out, by and large, you know, people like Connie Britton or like, what's his name? Chandler? Kyle Chandler?
Kyle Chandler. Good Lord. Sorry, Kyle. Yes. Those actors, always kind of had their place, but, the kids are still trying to figure themselves out a little bit.
Which I think plays as them being insecure high schoolers,
Right, exactly. No, it does fit. It does fit. And then season 2, I think they're a little more comfortable, and even though the writers probably didn't quite know what to do there, everything was still on point, right? Cinematography from the beginning. Yeah, it has a style.
Someone literally gets away with murder.
This is true. But there's definitely a style to the show, like a definitive look and a definitive feel that each scene must have and that each episode must have. And, there's probably rules regarding like music choice and all of these things that influence that general feeling of the show. So I think more than probably any other network show that I've seen, there's a definitive feel that is always consistent. Mm-hmm. So, you have something like Lost, right? Lost is an example of like high caliber network television show. I mean, say what you will about the writing, halfway through or whatever, but for the most part, I mean, those performances, everything's pretty on point.
Yeah.
But even that show was a little inconsistent in its tone and in its cinematography and in its style. From episode to episode, you may get something different. But especially towards those later episodes. But Friday Night Lights always had a style that was unique, and it's been parodied a billion times because it's so identifiable. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that elevates it above, like you said, that typical network television, which is all about like, let's use sets in the studio somewhere and, just set everything up very simple, over the shoulder shots, everything at eye level done.
Yeah.
And then this show is that next level. I mean, each episode is a mini movie, and even if the pacing is weird in the first and the second season, or even if things are still kind of in flux in those early seasons, you're right. By the third, fourth, and fifth, I mean, everything's just like clockwork. Everything's just rolling along perfect. And yeah, I love this show because there's nothing else like it. When you think of television sports shows, what else is there really other than like Blue Mountain State? Is that about it?
Yeah, which I haven't seen.
I haven't seen that either. But this show is kind of wholly its own, and so yeah, I enjoy it for all of those reasons. I was going to ask you, and I wanted to ask you via text whenever you were getting to this point, but I decided to wait until the show. But what did you think about the almost like reboot after the third season?
Oh, okay.
Did that put you off, or was that like an interesting change to you? Because it's one of the only shows, for those of you who don't know, after the third season, there's a big shakeup in the lives of the main characters, Kyle Chandler and Connie Britton. And at that point, the show is very, very different. From then on out, we lose a lot of the actors, a lot of the characters that we've been following, and we get a new slate of people to get to know. So it's almost like a second pilot.
When did the McCoys show up? Is that season 3? Is that when the McCoys?
That was season 3, I think. Yeah.
Because 2, what happens in 2? 2 is just a 2.
2. I don't think there's really much in terms of
season 1 they win state, and then 2
season 2 we don't get to see state,
and then you learn that they didn't win because Smash got hurt, and then 3 I think 3 was when the McCoy show. Okay, yeah. I really liked that because the alternative is the inherent problem of doing high school movies or shows, which is at some point your actors and your characters are going to graduate, and so how are you going to do a show about high school football when your main when your young actor, your young cast is too old to be on the team? Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to have to introduce new characters anyway. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I thought it was completely natural because you do have to remember, and it refocused it as being like, in case anyone forgot, this is a show about Kyle Chandler primarily. I mean, he is the main character. He's the coach. This is about his life and his career. and his family and his players. And so I'm glad you're attached to Matt Saracen and Smash Williams and these great characters, but they aren't the main cast. They're supporting cast. And I really enjoyed it because, I mean, for anyone who's worried about spoilers or not, I'll try not to spoil it. But I mean, the first season, he's head coach for the Dillon Panthers, and they're this big Texas, really well funded football team, and this is in a town that worships high school football. It's what they're all about. And Dustin, you and I both live in the South. I mean, I'm sure you can relate as well as I can to how much of a big deal football is down here, especially high school football.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, we do at my job in the news. I mean, we have a crew who has a live broadcast of the high school football games every Friday on our sister station. It's a huge, and then we have a high school football highlight show after the news on Fridays, and that's it's a big deal because the people here like it. That's one of the things people like in the South. So. So for some people may think it's a little weird that football is such a big deal in this show, but if you're from this area of the country, you're like, true. This is true. This is completely accurate.
And the fact that football players get away with the craziest things, that's accurate.
Yeah. Not actual murder, as in this is the case with someone,
right? Or living with meth dealers or whatever. But
or brazenly drinking.
Sure.
When you're 16, but
I know, right?
That doesn't even happen in Lower Alabama, where I'm at.
Right. Or starting a relationship with the 30-year-old next door, or whatever.
Or sticking your teacher's aide. Well, that happens, I guess.
Yeah, that happens.
That happened the other day here. I'm not kidding. It happened twice. It happened with two different schools.
Well, now I feel bad that I kind of laughed about it.
No, it is funny. I don't think the parents think it's too funny, but I do. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so it's a completely truthful setting, but so in this town, football is really big, and with the first season, it's a real, not really predictable, but it's a long season with lots of characters, and at the end of it, they succeed. And then so it's just like, look, spoiler alert, first season, they win state. So I'm thinking okay, there's 4 more seasons of this show, so are they going to win state every season, or are they going to never win state again? Like, I feel like maybe it peaked early, but that's sort of part of the storyline because it's at a certain, because then the next year, maybe they don't because the writers strike, and then at the end of, and then something happens at the end of the 3rd season, and all of a sudden he's coaching a team that has almost no funding, no booster club, terrible facilities and whatever, and a whole new cast of characters. But you're so engaged in his struggle. It's like you finally get to see Coach Taylor, who's basically been on top of the world and whose biggest struggle was dealing with the social climate of polite, basically of Dustin, you and I can relate to this too, like two-faced, just to help out people picture this, like two-faced, almost two-faced churchy people. A real polite town where everyone dresses nice and we're all a family here and we pray before the meals and we got the football, but like they're really terrible people, or they treat other people badly or something, and then so you throw him in with these players who some of them have criminal records, and the school is not thought of as very good, or the people who go there aren't thought of as very good or upstanding people. And you could see Kyle Chandler, who you could see Coach Taylor and his family sort of deal with not being liked by the public. At first, it was too much, and it was like, how do you deal with everyone sort of wanting favors from you or expecting you to do good things or cooking dinner for you because you won the big game last week? You're a traitor, Coach Taylor, and your team's garbage, and your players are garbage, and you're garbage, and it's incredibly engaging to watch, and especially just to watch the town turn on him like that, and to really what I think was the strongest feature is that you've got incredibly complex characters who, some of them are kind of archetypes, and while they do predictable things every now and then, they've got characters you care about, and the stories are engaging because what's at stake most of the time, like, you know, this isn't a show with like life and death stakes like Breaking Bad, but it's got this equal amount of tension, especially if you have kids, or even if you don't, even if you've been through it. I mean, it doesn't take, you don't have to be a parent to be concerned that almost every episode, one of these characters is on the road to making a mistake that will ruin their future. And that's real tense to watch, because you really want Tyra to get into college, and every time she decides like, oh, this isn't worth it, or I'm mad at Landry, I'm not going to study for the SAT, it's like, no, stick with, you just want to scream at her, like, or every time her mom's like, Tyra, don't worry about it, no one went to college in this family, and you know, you're kind of stuck up if you do go to college, you just want to scream at her mom and go, no, that's you are
not parenting.
A terrible influence on her. Like, tell her to go study. Just because you didn't go to college, don't be shamed by your daughter going to college and succeeding and making a better life for herself, so she doesn't grow up and be a waitress like you know, and being taken advantage of by the wrong kind of men, you know, and many characters go through that, but especially with Michael B. Jordan's character with Vince in the last 2 seasons. You know, he's a lot of these characters was on the wrong road, and you know, I don't want to say just through the guidance of Coach Taylor, but just through his own, with being able to find out what he was capable of as a man, learning that this doesn't have to be my life, and I am in control of my destiny. Like, I can pull myself up. It's incredibly satisfying to see these characters grow, and it's a great show. I mean, sometimes it was a slog because you're just sort of waiting for the story, for certain people's stories to conclude. That's the only real complaint I have about it, is it's not an A+ in storytelling. Sometimes it's boring, or sometimes it's predictable, but but
I feel like
incredibly well executed.
I feel like one of the strengths of the show is, and whether they did this on purpose or not, you know, it's probably that they didn't, but it comes across really well, which is the fact that when you're watching the show, especially the early seasons or in the 4th season, because we're getting used to these new characters, how slowly you get to know them. And so at first it may seem like, oh, that's not believable. Like, especially the early season, look at it and be like, oh, Tim Riggins couldn't do that or whatever. As it goes along, and especially after you've seen the show and then you go back and watch it again, you start to realize, like, they're always in character. It was me that I didn't know them. And the show gets better as you stick with it. The show gets better because you get to know the characters more. And that's sort of the same with real life. You can look at a person from the outside, like, you know, you start a new job and you've got some coworkers and you're like, I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing, or, you know, you don't make sense to me. But as you get to know them, and as slowly they let you in on their secrets and on, you know, who they are as a person, then you can start stepping back and saying, yes, it does make sense now. And that's the way this show is. And especially with Vince, you know, if you watch the first few episodes, Vince is kind of a jerk. Vince is like quiet, and I don't want your help. I don't want to know anything that you're doing, you know, whatever. Think about when Coach Taylor and Buddy go to like scout him while he's playing basketball with his bros,
his homies.
And he's just kind of a jerk to them, like really short and quick, and like, you know, I'm not interested, go away. And at first you're going to be like, okay, well, that seems out of character, but it really isn't, because that's the Vince that he lets other people see. And slowly, as the episodes progress, we as the audience get to see more of him and get to understand why he's projecting that exterior. And so it's the same, you know, just with real life. When you get to know people, you can understand them better. And then it also helps when you look at that episode, the exterior that he's putting forth, and then the final episode and the exterior he puts forth then, they're completely different, right? Vince has changed and he's sort of become a man. Yeah. And so that's a super, super interesting arc to watch him go through. But like I said, you know, one of the earliest characters that I hated was Tyra, because I didn't understand who she was or what she was coming from. And as you get to know her sister and her mother and see what they are, then you start to see why she does the things that she does. Because there's like in the second or third episode, there's like some dude, she's a waitress at Applebee's, and there's some dude that comes through town, and he's like, I don't know, based out of Chicago or something. And I can't remember what he does, but he's, a businessman type. And she ends up going to the hotel to sleep with him. And keep in mind, this is like a 16-year-old girl. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, this doesn't add up. This doesn't make sense. Like, I'm sure it happens, but it just doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem realistic. But after you watch that episode, after having seen seasons 2 and 3, you start saying, yeah, I get it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As you stick with the show, it's its own reward because you now know the characters better than you did before. So in many ways, I think it's better on repeat viewings. Yeah,
it's if you haven't watched this show, hop on to Netflix and start chipping away at it. Make it your I mean, if I hadn't already been almost done with it, I would have watched it every night when I got home from like high school football. I mean, like as just sort of like a companion piece,
Right, sure.
But
sure.
I mean, especially now going into football season. I mean, if you just, I mean, it's about so much more. But I mean, it's just it provides a setting that I think can appeal to so many people. With this teen drama and with family drama and sports drama. It's real. It's a real gratifying show. I mean, Coach Taylor has become just kind of this iconic, television dad, as this pillar of morality and fairness, and
even though he doesn't always do the right thing, which is very interesting.
Yeah,
that they're able to do both of those things. Yeah,
and I want to give a kudos to Kyle Chandler and Connie Britton and the writers and Peter Berg for portraying probably one of the most realistic depictions of a marriage, of a good marriage and a real marriage on television. Like with having conversations where he says something incredibly insensitive to her and maybe she doesn't react maturely to him about it, but then they come together and one of them apologizes, or they're pissed for a couple episodes at each other, but for not showing marriage as this thing. What I don't like with shows is when they show marriage as I don't like when you have all of a sudden everything's okay, like oh, we have these fundamentally different problems, and then someone's dad dies, and so they just start crying and hugging each other, and their marriage is fixed, and it's like, no, what, no. Right. I don't like, and I also don't like seeing marriages where people are like real shitty to each other, and then every now and then they kiss, and it's like, that's terrible too, because you're showing people that people are going to model their behavior after this. And I also don't like it when the couples never fight. They're always on the same page. They're basically the same people, and that's why they're such a good match, because that's an unrealistic expectation of your partner, that you should find that you should or would be able to find someone who is exactly like you. They almost have the same DNA helix as you do.
Sure.
This is showing two people who have the same values, who have different personalities, but they share the same values and family goals, and who are incredibly supportive of each other despite their respective and individual and unique flaws. That's marriage, and that's a healthy relationship. And it's nice to see them execute that so well on television without going around saying, "Whoa, we're the marriage show. We're the show with the good marriage." This is just, by the way, I should.
It's just life.
It's just life. This show portrays life.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I always say. Like, yeah, it's great to look at this show and say it's about football, but it really is like football is more the setting.
Its setting is football.
Yeah. So really, what it's about is just life and various things. And yeah, they're heightened for dramatic television effect, but it is real life, and it is things that people go through, and chances are probably if you pick 7 people off the street, they're not all going through all these crazy things at the same time. But, for the show, they do. But, it's life, and really kind of, to me, the show is about community, and it's about like pouring all of yourself into people and saying like, I'm going to give you confidence. I'm going to give you self-esteem. I'm going to give you the ability to be a man. I'm going to give you the ability to deal with hard situations. I'm going to give you the ability to this, that, and the other. And both Coach Taylor and Miss Taylor do that in equal measure. Her as a guidance counselor, him as a coach. They're able to grow kids up to be successful, or at the very least embrace, themselves and be better than they were the day before. And so to me, the show is just about an outpouring, or maybe you reap what you sow or whatever, but it's about sowing into your community everything that you can, even at your own expense. And
despite your economic circumstances.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things in the show where Coach Taylor has to sacrifice in order for for Miss Taylor to get what she wants, or for Julie to be happy, or whatever. There are sacrifices that are made, and that's not only realistic, that's not only life, but that's a good lesson to teach people that you're not always going to get what you want, but you can make somebody happy, and
Well, and essentially what you're just saying, like that I really appreciate is that I appreciate that the show doesn't positively doesn't show any rewards to any sort of victim mentality or any kind of. I mean, particularly with the example of Vince. Vince is an African American youth who is dabbling in kind of crime. His mom's a drug addict. His dad's in prison. And he's kind of on the wrong path. And you could say, like, well, he's a product of his environment. But Coach Taylor kind of gets a hold of him and says, you are extremely talented and you have a lot to offer. And he sort of opens the door for Vince. He doesn't coddle him. He's not the great white hope, this whole blindside thing of like, I'm white, I'll make your black life better. He comes in and says, you are capable of so much. You don't have to let your life just be this. You, by your own power, can be better. And Vince rises above his circumstances. He busts his ass and he gets his mom help. When his dad gets out of prison and starts kind of changing things up, he steps up for his mom. He steps up for his team. He steps up for himself. He steps up for what's her face, whatever the girlfriend. And he starts stepping up and becomes a man. And before you know it, if you're Vince, you turn and look over your shoulder at some point and you look back at how far you've come in life with your own bootstraps. And I appreciate that this show, and that's just one example, but he did that with Smash. He did that with Matt Saracen. He did that. He does it. He tried with his own daughter, I guess. But he does it with so many of these. Luke Cafferty. He brought these people who were getting in their own way, basically in life, and basically said, this thing you're dealing with doesn't have to matter as much, and you can still get the job done, and you can still do what has to be done, and before you know it, you've become someone great. And I appreciate, and if you think it's dramatic that I'm saying like that a lot of shows don't do that, they don't. They don't. A lot of shows are real shallow, either comedy or they overtly or covertly push sort of this message of like, hey, you're not really in control of a lot of things, and some people hate you just because they hate you, and you're never going to be able to change that, so you should just hate them back. Instead, it's like, no, be your best self, no matter your circumstances, and you will have a positive impact on your family, yourself, and your community.
It's a show, to me, in terms of comparing it to other shows that don't do things, is because because maybe that's just what's popular or what's in the zeitgeist right now, is an idea of like cynicism or pessimism, or let's find something to complain about. But this show is like, no, you can't complain about stuff. The stuff that Matt Saracen goes through would make anybody sit there and say like, yeah, life is just hard, right? I've got a grandmother that I've got to take care of. My mom ran out on me. My dad's in the military. I don't never get to see him. He's a jerk when he shows up. These things would make a person complain, but instead this show pushes optimism in a way that I don't think any other show has in a very long time. I remember John saying when I first started watching the show that he felt that this show was like the new Andy Griffith show. and he said that he felt like Coach Taylor was the modern Andy Taylor. So, because remember on Andy Griffith, his name was Andy Taylor.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah. So he felt that this show was sort of the modern equivalent of the Andy Griffith show, which pushes like optimism toward the community. And that kind of stuck with me because I was thinking, like, as I was watching it, like, yeah, that's kind of what they're doing. I mean, obviously, in the Andy Griffith show, there's nothing that's really, like, super, like, you know, terrible, right? I mean, you may have, like, a bank robber, but you're never going to have, like, a drug addict episode.
Right.
But
see Don Knotts just, like, with a belt around his arm, like,
right.
oh,
leave me alone, Ange. But yeah, I mean, but this is the modern equivalent of that in its message, which is kind of pro-family, like optimism, I don't want to say it's pro-conservative values because I don't know that it is. But I don't know that it's not. You know what I mean? To me, it's very middle of the road.
It is. Like, I'd say people would probably we might consider it as conservative values, but at the same time, it's like they're only conservative values because liberal values appear to preach the opposite of
right.
You know, do for yourself and get moving, you know, no matter what.
I think the show is apolitical, but I feel like if you were to sit and count it, it's more old fashioned, I guess, in its I don't know
in its political and social persuasion.
Sure.
Yeah, but it does a very good job of trying not to alienate people. I mean, even if you're like really far to the left or the right, I mean, you can at the very least, look at these situations and go, okay, well, in these specific circumstances, I understand the choices these people are making.
Right. Or, I mean, here's the easiest one, right? The hot button issue of abortion. When Tammy Taylor has to deal with abortion, that they are very careful in what they have her say and what they say as writers about the issue. So much so that when I was watching it, I felt like they were succeeding at alienating nobody with what they were doing.
Right. And it wasn't milquetoast either. It wasn't like, oh, well, you know, that's... blah, blah,
right, no. No, Tammy, I feel like Tammy had an opinion.
Yeah.
But the opinion part of it lasted all of like 60 seconds, and then the aftermath, those like 3 or 4 episodes afterwards where she's dealing with the ramifications of what this girl has done, those are apolitical. Those have no... I mean, anybody can watch that and say she does not deserve what's happening to her right now.
Yeah.
And so that part where it's let's give an answer or give advice to somebody in this position, and that was very carefully done so as to do 2 things. 1, not alienate the audience, but 2, be faithful to the character and what her values may be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think the way that it was performed and the way that it was written was very calculated, and I appreciate that it was not – I never felt like it was trying to push any agenda at all ever.
No.
It was just, here's a story. Let me tell you this story. And whether you agree with it or you don't, like in terms of the character's choices, that's kind of the point. You're not going to agree with everything that everybody around you does, but you can still enjoy their company. And so in a weird way – I can still enjoy watching this show even if I don't agree with it because the show isn't hammering anything down my throat, just like a friend isn't going to hammer anything down your throat about, you know, well, this is my choice and this is why you should believe me. You should do the same thing. You know what I mean? So to me, the show is very, very different because there's so much that pushes agendas these days. And this just pushed real life, I felt. I
agree. Yeah, check that show out. Netflix, all 5 seasons. Check it out.
It is well worth your time. Like Hooper said, though, you may have to slog through the first season. It is long, and they were still trying to find their footing. But Having said that, there's still some great nuggets. And if you have seen this show, but it's been a while, go back and check it out again because, like I said, repeat viewings kind of make it better.
Yeah. Well, real quick, Justin, I'm looking at what's opening this week in theaters, and I don't really recognize anything. There's the Transporter Refueled. I guess they're rebooting that franchise.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Right.
I'm seeing a movie called A Walk in the Woods right here that has Robert Redford, Nick Nolte, Emma Thompson, Mayor Steenburgen, Nick Offerman, and Kristen Schaal. So I know who all those people are, and you know that's a pretty good cast. I can't wait to see Nick Nolte in the woods.
Mm-hmm. I know, right?
You know, sober in the woods, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seeing Nick Nolte sober is like a rare sight anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's like watching him in that movie Warrior. Like I told you, like that's one of the few movies that can make me cry because like he's like just this recovered out. He used to like beat his kids, and now he's like not. He's like sober now, and he's trying to reconcile with his children, and they hate him, and he's just like, Brennan, I want to make it better. And they're like, yeah, well, you got your son back. See you later. And he's like, no, Brennan, please. And then, like, at a certain point in the movie, like, he just falls off the wagon. And he's drunk in a hotel room reciting Moby Dick. And, like, you know, and it's a real sad scene, so I don't want to, like, make light of it. But he's just like, the white whale, you son of a bitch. And I'm just like... Oh my God! Like I this must be what him drunk for real is like.
Wow!
Just quoting Herman Melville and with a bottle of vodka in his hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I heard an interview with Michael Madsen one time where him and Nick Nolte are friends. Oh, it was on the Adam Carolla show, and Adam Carolla said, "Do you guys have like a gravelly voice off every now and then?" And he's like, yeah, Nick, I was on shooting a movie, and I got a call from my wife, and I'm like, hey, honey, how's it going? And she's like, Nick is here. Like, he's like, what, like here in the house? I was like, yeah, he's in the house. Here, and he's like, put him on the phone. And he's like, hey, Madsen, how's it going? I brought some fireworks over and shoot them off in the yard. And I'm just like, oh, okay, Nick, just shoot them off in the yard. I'm like, what? What is his life? He just
came over. Crazy.
I just dropped him by, brought some fireworks. I didn't know. I thought you might be home, but you're in Vancouver. So if you don't mind, your wife doesn't mind, I'm just going to go in your backyard and shoot off these Roman candles. I drove all the way here. I'd like to go ahead and shoot these fireworks
I might
off.
as well do it, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind. It's just
that's
like
awesome.
I'd like to see a documentary about Nick Nolte. I feel like it'd be incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's he's in A Walk in the Woods, which probably has nothing to do with fireworks or drunkenness. So
probably,
if that sounds boring to you in comparison to his real life, then I urge you to just Google him and have yourself a nice read.
Exactly. Just look up a few interviews. There you go.
Yeah.
One other thing, too, before we go, opens in theaters. This is Chris Evans' directorial debut.
Oh.
So it's interesting, you know, that he's directing now. I hear this film already came out on video on demand, so you may be able to find it on, like, Comcast. I don't know where it is exactly, but it's out there somewhere. People have seen it, but it's out in theaters this weekend, too. So
wait, is this Bloodsucking Bastards? No,
what do you mean?
It's probably not. That's a movie. I thought.
Oh, no, it's called Before We Go.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that's the one next to it.
Oh, gotcha. No. Before We Go is like a romantic comedy, so I hope it's not about blood-sucking vampire. What'd you say?
Bastards.
Oh, okay, yes, gotcha. Yeah. Well, no, I don't think it's that either.
These are fatherless children who drink blood. Yeah. Okay. Well, blank slate for next week. We got nothing in particular, so we'll hit you up with whatever we got next week. So stay tuned for that. If you want to send us an email, you can just send it to hoopercast@gmail.com. You can follow us on iTunes or Podbean at HooperCast or hoopercastpod.podbean.com or hoopercastpod/Facebook or something like that. At HooperCast on Twitter, hoopercastpod.blogspot.com, hoopercastpod.tumblr.com, or you can just use the famous Google and Google us, and we'll pop up.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, dog. All right. So, till next week, this is me, and that's Dustin, signing
Hello.
off.
Goodbye.
And goodbye. Adios, everybody.
Let Hooper take a turn. Hooper drives the boat, Chief.